It seems like a strange thing to do when you think about it, caring for the sick, looking after the elderly. From a purely cold biological standpoint, it doesn't make much sense. Survival of the fittest, we hear that all the time. It sounds brutal, every creature for itself. The weak get picked off by predators. The old slow down the group and are left behind. That's the law of the jungle, right? It's efficient. It keeps the gene pool strong. But that's not the whole story. Not for us. We humans are the odd ones out. We spend enormous amounts of time, energy, and resources on individuals who cannot contribute much to the group's immediate survival. A child with a high fever, a teenager with a broken leg, a grandfather who can no longer hunt or gather. We don't abandon them, we rally around them, we feed them, protect them, and try to heal them. This impulse, this deep-seated behavior is one of the most fundamental things that makes us human. It's not a modern invention. It's not something we came up with in the last few centuries with hospitals and medicine. It goes back, way, way back. So far back that it predates our own species. So, when did we start? When did our ancestors look at a sick or injured group member and see a person to be cared for, not a burden to be discarded? The answer is written in the bones they left behind. To find the first glimmers of this compassion, we have to travel back in time. Not just thousands of years, but millions. Let's go to a place called Dmanisi in what is now the country of Georgia. Here, archaeologists found a collection of fossils from some of our very early ancestors, a species called Homo erectus, or a close relative. They lived around 1.8 million years ago. These weren't modern humans. They had smaller brains, more primitive tools. They were tough survivors in a harsh world. Among the skulls they found, one stands out. It's the skull of an old individual. And when I say old, I mean old for that time. Maybe 40 years old, which was a very long life, but the most remarkable thing about this skull is what it's missing teeth. This individual had lost all but one of their teeth long before they died. The jawbone itself had healed and resorbed. The bone grew back over the empty sockets. This isn't something that happens in a few weeks or months. It takes years. Think about that for a moment. An individual, 1.8 million years ago, with no teeth. In a world without blenders or soup kitchens, how did they eat? They couldn't chew tough meat from a hunt. They couldn't grind up fibrous roots or nuts. They would have starved to death, quickly and quietly, if left to fend for themselves. But they didn't. They lived for years after their teeth were gone. There's only one way that's possible. Someone else was helping them. Someone was taking the time to find soft foods for them. Maybe they chewed food first and then gave it to the old one. Maybe they mashed up plants or brought them soft bone marrow. We don't know the exact method, but we know the outcome. This toothless ancestor was kept alive by their group. This is perhaps the earliest fossil evidence we have of this kind of sustained care. It's not just a fleeting moment of pity, it's a long-term commitment. It tells us that even this far back, our ancestors had social bonds strong enough to support a dependent member. They understood that this person still had value, or they cared for them out of something we might recognize as empathy. This wasn't just about survival of the fittest individual, it was about the survival of the group, and that group included its most vulnerable members. It pushes the origin of compassion back into a time we once thought was governed only by brutal necessity. The story doesn't stop there. As our ancestors evolved, the evidence for care becomes more common and more compelling. The real stars of this ancient story are not our own direct ancestors, but our cousins, the Neanderthals. For a long time, Neanderthals had a bad reputation. We pictured them as brutish, dim-witted cavemen. The word Neanderthal is still used as an insult, but the archaeological record tells a very different story. They were intelligent, sophisticated hunters who survived in Ice Age Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. And they were profoundly compassionate. Let's go to a cave in the Zagros Mountains of Iraq. It's called Shenadar Cave. In the 1950s, archaeologists unearthed the skeletons of several Neanderthals. One of them, known as Shenadar 1, tells an incredible story of a life of suffering and care. Shenadar 1 was a male who lived to be around 40 or 50 years old. Again, a respectable old age for his time. But his skeleton shows a lifetime of debilitating injuries. He had a crushing blow to the left side of his head when he was young. It would have damaged his brain and almost certainly left him blind in his left eye. His right arm was withered and useless. It had been broken in several places and never healed properly. The lower part of the arm and hand were likely amputated, either by an accident or intentionally. He also had a severe injury to his leg and foot, which would have given him a painful, pronounced limp. He probably had hearing loss too, due to bone growth in his ear canals. This was a man who was, by any practical measure, severely disabled. He couldn't hunt effectively with one arm and one good eye. He couldn't move quickly to escape danger. He couldn't defend himself well. In a harsh Ice Age environment, he should have been an easy meal for a cave bear or a pack of wolves. He should have died young, but he didn't. He lived for decades with these injuries. He survived long enough for his bones to heal and show the signs of old age. How? His group kept him alive. They protected him, they shared their food with him. They tolerated his slowness and his disabilities. They saw him not as a liability, but as a member of their family, their clan. They cared for him. And Shanidar 1 is not an isolated case. Another famous Neanderthal skeleton found in France is called the Old Man of La Chapelle aux Saints. He was also old when he died. He suffered from crippling arthritis in his spine and hips. He would have been bent over in constant pain. He also had lost most of his teeth. And like the individual from Dominici, he would have needed his food processed for him. His group provided that care. They didn't leave him behind when they moved camp. They supported him to the end. The evidence from Neanderthal sites is overwhelming. We find skeletons of individuals who survived traumatic injuries, congenital defects, and the degenerative diseases of old age. This pattern of survival is not an accident. It's a clear signal of a society that had a system of social support. Compassion was woven into the fabric of their daily lives. So this brings us back to the big question. Why? Why would our ancestors, living on the edge of survival, invest so much in the weak and the elderly? The survival of the fittest idea, at least in its simplistic form, just doesn't explain this. The answer is that human evolution isn't just about the individual, it's about the group. And a group that cares for its members is a stronger, more resilient group. There are a few key evolutionary ideas that help explain this. The first is called kin selection. It's a simple concept. You share a lot of your genes with your close relatives. Your parents, your siblings, your children. By helping them survive, you are indirectly helping your own genes get passed on to the next generation. So, caring for a sick brother or an aging parent isn't purely selfless from a genetic point of view. It's an investment in your shared genetic legacy. This explains why care often starts with the family. It's a powerful biological drive, but Neanderthals and early humans didn't just care for their immediate family. They cared for others in their group too. This is where another idea, reciprocal altruism, comes in. Well, it's a fancy term for a very simple social rule. I'll scratch your back, you'll scratch mine. Life in the Paleolithic was unpredictable and dangerous. Anyone could get sick. Anyone could have a hunting accident. If I help you today when you have a broken leg, I am building social credit. I am reinforcing a social norm. Next month, when I'm the one who falls from a tree, you'll be more likely to help me. A group that operates on this principle is far more likely to survive a crisis than a group where every individual is on their own. Compassion acts like a form of social insurance. It creates a safety net. It makes the entire group tougher and more adaptable. But there's an even more profound reason for caring for the elderly, one that is uniquely human. It's called the grandmother hypothesis. In most animal species, females can reproduce until they die. But in humans, and a few species of whales, females go through menopause. They live for decades after they are no longer able to have their own children. From a purely reproductive standpoint, this seems like a waste. Why would evolution select for a long post-reproductive lifespan? The answer is that grandmothers are incredibly valuable. An older woman freed from the demands of her own infant children can dedicate her time and energy to helping her daughters and sons raise their children. She can help gather food. She can look after the toddlers while their mother is busy with a newborn. This allows her daughter to have more children and to have them closer together. The grandmother's help dramatically increases the survival rate of her grandchildren. By helping them, she is ensuring the success of her own genes. But it's not just about childcare. The elderly are living libraries of knowledge. Think about a world with no books, no internet. All crucial information had to be stored in people's minds. An old person in the group would remember things no one else did. They would remember the great drought from 30 years ago and where to find that hidden spring that never runs dry. They would know which plants are poisonous and which ones can be used as medicine. They would know how to handle rare but dangerous situations, like a conflict with a neighboring group or a sudden flood. This accumulated knowledge was a life or death resource. Keeping the elders alive, even when they were physically frail, was not an act of charity. It was a strategic investment in the group's survival. They were not a burden, they were an essential part of the community's brain trust. The stories and wisdom of the old were the group's most valuable asset. The respect and care they received was the price of that wisdom. So, the impulse to care is not some soft, sentimental luxury. It's a hard-nosed evolutionary strategy. It binds the group together, creates a resilient social safety net, and preserves vital information. The groups of ancestors who developed these behaviors outcompeted the groups that didn't. Compassion was a competitive advantage. It was, in its own way, a form of being the fittest. When our own species, Homo sapiens, appeared on the scene, we seem to have taken this foundation and built upon it. We were even more social than the Neanderthals. We formed larger groups, more complex networks. And with that came an even greater emphasis on social bonds, on shared identity, and on caring for one another. We see this in the way our ancestors began to bury their dead. Neanderthals occasionally buried their dead, but early Homo sapiens did it much more frequently and with more elaborate ritual. They didn't just dispose of a body, they placed it carefully in a grave, sometimes in a specific position. They often included grave goods, tools, shell beads, animal bones, or pigments like red ochre. This is a profound step. Burying someone with their favorite tools or with beautiful ornaments is not about survival. It's about something else entirely. It's about memory. It's about respect. It suggests a belief that the individual's identity continues in some way after death. It shows that the person was valued for who they were, not just what they could do. It is an expression of grief, of love. It's the ultimate act of care extended even beyond life itself. This emotional and symbolic layer is what we, Homo sapiens, added to the ancient impulse of care. It wasn't just a practical calculation anymore. It became a core part of our culture, our morality, our very definition of what it means to be human. For hundreds of thousands of years, this was the way it worked. Care was a personal, community-based affair. It happened within small, tight-knit groups of hunter-gatherers. If you were sick, your mother, your cousin, your hunting partner looked after you. The elderly were respected members of the community, living and dying surrounded by family. Then, about 10,000 years ago, everything changed. We invented agriculture. This was arguably the biggest revolution in human history. We stopped wandering and settled down in one place. We started growing our own food. This led to larger populations, the first villages, and eventually cities and civilizations. This new way of life had a huge impact on how we cared for the sick and elderly. In some ways, settled life made care easier. You no longer had to worry about moving a sick person from one camp to another. You could have a permanent home where someone could rest and recover. Food supplies, while not always reliable, were more concentrated. But agriculture also brought new problems. Living close together with lots of other people and domesticated animals was a perfect breeding ground for diseases. Epidemics of cholera, smallpox, and influenza became a major threat in a way they never were for small bands of hunter-gatherers. The diet was often less varied and less nutritious, leading to new health problems. Repetitive farm labor led to a different set of chronic injuries, like arthritis in the back and knees. So, the need for care increased dramatically, and as societies grew larger and more complex, the nature of care began to change. It was still primarily a family responsibility, but for the first time we start to see the emergence of specialists and institutions dedicated to care. In ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, we see the first doctors and healers who used a mix of medicine, magic, and religion. We see texts describing illnesses and their prescribed treatments. In ancient Greece and Rome, medicine became a more systematic field of study. Great thinkers like Hippocrates tried to separate illness from divine punishment and understand it as a natural process. The Romans, with their highly organized military, developed the first dedicated hospitals called valetudinaria to care for sick and wounded soldiers. These were not for the general public, but they were the first buildings designed specifically for healing. With the rise of major religions, caring for the sick became a central moral and spiritual duty. Christianity, in particular, placed a huge emphasis on charity and compassion for the poor and the sick. The story of the Good Samaritan became a powerful parable for caring for strangers in need. Monasteries became key centers of knowledge and healing during the Middle Ages. Monks preserved ancient medical texts and ran infirmaries that served not just their own members, but also the local community. They offered a level of care that was often unavailable anywhere else. Over the centuries, this trend continued. Care slowly moved from being solely a private family matter to also being a public or institutional one. Hospitals were built in growing cities, often funded by the church or wealthy patrons. Almshouses were created to look after the destitute elderly. These early institutions were often basic and sometimes grim, but they represented a major shift. Society was starting to take collective responsibility for its most vulnerable members. The last 200 years have seen this process accelerate beyond anything our ancestors could have imagined. The scientific revolution, the development of modern medicine, and the rise of the modern state have completely transformed how we care for the sick and elderly. We discovered germs, which led to sanitation and antibiotics. We developed vaccines that wiped out diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia. We invented surgery that could repair the body in miraculous ways. We can now treat cancer, manage diabetes, and replace worn-out joints. People are living longer than ever before. An old age of 80 or 90 is no longer a rarity, it's an expectation in many parts of the world. To manage this, we have built a vast, complex, and expensive healthcare system. Care has become professionalized. We have doctors, nurses, surgeons, therapists, and caregivers. We have hospitals, clinics, nursing homes, and assisted living facilities. We have government programs and insurance companies to pay for it all. We have, in many ways, achieved a level of care that would seem like godlike magic to our ancestors. The man from Shannadar Cave with his withered arm and blind eye would be astonished by what we can do. The old woman with crippling arthritis could get a new hip and walk without pain. But in this process of professionalizing and institutionalizing care, something has also been lost. Care is no longer something that is deeply embedded in the daily life of the community. We have outsourced it to experts and institutions. When a parent gets old and frail, our first thought is often not, how can we adapt our home to care for them? But what is the best nursing home we can find? When someone is seriously ill, they are taken away to a hospital, a sterile and unfamiliar environment, surrounded by machines and strangers in uniforms, however well-intentioned they may be. The personal connection, the deep-seated community responsibility that defined care for millions of years, has been weakened. The elderly, once the respected keepers of wisdom, can sometimes be isolated and warehoused, seen as a problem to be managed rather than a resource to be treasured. The sick can feel like a set of symptoms to be treated rather than a whole person to be comforted. We are now facing a modern paradox. We have more power to heal and extend life than ever before. But we are also lonelier. We struggle with the immense costs of our healthcare systems. We grapple with the ethical dilemmas of end-of-life care. We have professionalized the mechanics of care, but we sometimes forget the humanity of it. The journey of how we care for one another is the story of humanity itself. It began nearly 2 million years ago, with a simple act of sharing soft food with a toothless elder. It was a brutally practical survival strategy that bound our ancestors together and allowed them to conquer a hostile world. It was strengthened by the Neanderthals, who showed us that a society can be defined by its compassion for its most broken members. It was enriched by our own species, who added layers of ritual, love, and memory to this ancient impulse. It has transformed over the centuries, moving from the campfire to the community, from the monastery to the modern hospital. But the core impulse remains the same. It is the recognition of ourselves in another person. It is the understanding that a group is only as strong as its ability to protect its most vulnerable. It is the deep, ancient, and profoundly human need to reach out a hand and help. We are still figuring out how to balance our incredible medical technology with this fundamental human need for connection. Perhaps the future of care lies not just in new drugs and new machines, but in rediscovering the wisdom of our ancestors. The wisdom that tells us that the best way to survive is together, and that the true measure of a society is not its strength or its wealth, but how it treats its sick and its elderly. The impulse is still there, deep in our bones. We just have to remember how to listen to it.